there is a strange moment that happens in almost every true crime story now. At first, you are told about the victims, their names, their photos, their last messages, their families, the places they should have gone next, the birthdays they never reached, the mothers who still speak about them in the present tense because the past tense feels like betrayal. Then, slowly, the camera moves. It turns away from the people who died, and it begins to stare at the person who took everything. The killer's childhood, the killer's clothes, the killer's interviews, the killer's hairstyle, the killer's prison letters, the killer's love life, the killer's followers, the killer's face, reproduced again and again until it becomes more recognizable than the faces of the dead. And at some point, without anyone saying it out loud, the question changes. It is no longer only, what happened? It becomes, who is this person? And then something darker happens. Some people do not watch with horror. They watch with fascination. They follow the case. They argue in comment sections. They edit clips. They make fan accounts. They buy books. They watch documentaries the day they come out. They learn the killer's middle name, favorite songs, prison location, and childhood trauma. But they forget the victims' names. So tonight, the question is not whether true crime is popular. We already know it is. The question is worse. Is true crime turning killers into celebrities? And if the answer is yes, who is really responsible? The platforms? The creators? The audience? Or all of us, every time we press play? The newest example is The Crash. The case itself was already devastating. Mackenzie Shirilla was convicted after a high-speed crash in Strongsville, Ohio, killed Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Prosecutors said she intentionally accelerated the car to around 100 miles per hour and drove into a brick building. She was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 15 years. Those are the legal facts. 2 young men died. Families were shattered. A courtroom decided it was not an accident. But years later, when Netflix brought the story to a much larger audience, something else happened. The case did not just become known. It became content. And that word matters. Because content does not grieve. Content circulates. Content trends. Content creates thumbnails, edits, debate panels, reaction videos, podcasts, live streams, and comment wars. One side says the documentary gives the convicted woman a platform. Another side says the public has the right to hear her speak. One side says attention reopens wounds. Another says attention exposes details people should know. One side says the victims are being pushed into the background. Another says the documentary is keeping their names alive. And that is where true crime becomes dangerous. Not because telling real stories is automatically wrong. Sometimes true crime has helped expose corruption. Sometimes it has pressured authorities. Sometimes it has found witnesses, revived cold cases, or forced institutions to answer for mistakes. But true crime has another face. A face lit by a ring light. A face designed for the algorithm. A face that asks, with perfect timing, was she a monster or misunderstood? And the moment a story becomes framed that way, the killer becomes the product. The victims become the context. That is not new. Long before Netflix, long before TikTok, long before podcasts, killers had audiences. Ted Bundy understood cameras. He understood how to perform intelligence, charm, and control. He represented himself in court, gave interviews, smiled for the lens, and became, horrifyingly, one of the most recognizable murderers in American history. People still debate why. Was it because he was educated? Because he looked different from what the public expected a murderer to look like? Because the media could not resist the contrast between his appearance and his crimes? Whatever the reason, the result was undeniable. Bundy became famous. Not merely known. Famous. And fame does something strange to evil. It does not erase the crime, but it can surround it with style. With mystery. With danger. With a sick kind of glamour. Decades later, when an actor known for being charismatic played him in a film, the same question returned. Can you tell the story of a charming predator without making him charming all over again? That is not an easy question. Because Bundy used charm as a weapon. If a movie removes the charm, it lies about the weapon. But if it recreates the charm too well, it risks letting the weapon work again. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, is another example. After his arrest, he did not only become infamous. He attracted admirers. Women wrote to him. Some came to court. One eventually married him in prison. To a normal person, that sounds impossible. How could anyone look at the suffering connected to that name and see romance? But that is part of the sickness celebrity can create. It can detach a person from the consequences of their actions. It can turn a murderer into an image, a symbol, a dark aesthetic. The victims become history. The killer becomes mythology. And once that happens, every retelling has to make a choice. Does it break the myth? Or does it feed it? The Dahmer series brought that question back with force. Netflix's dramatization of Jeffrey Dahmer's crimes became one of the most discussed true crime events of its moment. Some viewers said it exposed police failures, racism, homophobia, and the ignored warnings that allowed Dahmer to keep killing. Others saw something more disturbing, another polished production built around the name and face of a murderer, while families connected to the victims said old wounds had been reopened. That is the contradiction. A story can be important and still be painful. A production can claim to center victims and still make the killer's name trend. A series can criticize society's fascination with murder and still profit from that fascination. And the audience can condemn exploitation while watching every episode. Maybe that is the part nobody likes to say. Platforms do not create demand out of nothing. They feed what is already there. They study it, measure it, package it, recommend it. But the first signal comes from us. We click. We watch. We pause on the killer's face. We ask whether they were born evil or made that way. We search their name. We look for interviews. We want to understand. That desire is not always wrong. Understanding violence can matter. Understanding manipulation, coercion, warning signs, institutional failures, and investigative mistakes can matter. Some families want stories told because silence can feel like a second death. But there's a line between understanding a crime and becoming entertained by a criminal. And online, that line is not only thin, it is profitable. The algorithm does not know grief. It knows retention. It knows that a face holds attention. A villain holds attention. A dramatic question holds attention. Did she mean to do it? Was he born evil? Could he have been stopped? Was she lying? What did the killer say next? Those questions keep people watching. But notice what they have in common. They orbit the perpetrator, not the victims. The same thing happens in thumbnails. Look closely at the visual language of true crime. Red letters, police tape, mugshots, dark eyes, a beautiful suspect, a smiling killer, a blurred victim, a shocked face, a question mark. The image asks you to feel fear, but it also asks you to feel curiosity. And curiosity is the gate people debate her appearance, her behavior, her remorse, her family, her future. Some are angry. Some are sympathetic. Some are simply entertained. And the families of the dead have to watch the person convicted in connection with their loss become a public figure. Imagine that. Imagine losing someone you love. Then, years later, opening your phone and seeing the person responsible turned into a trending topic. Not just in a court article, not just in a police update, but in edits, in debates, in fan arguments, in videos where strangers speak with confidence about a pain they do not have to carry. That is the moral injury true crime rarely understands. It is not only the retelling, it is the loss of control. The family does not get to decide when the story returns. A platform does. A release schedule does. An algorithm does. And once the story is public again, grief becomes public property. Of course, the other side of the argument is not meaningless. Some people say these stories should be told because the public must understand how ordinary situations become catastrophic. A relationship, a car, a text message, a decision, a trial. Some say hearing from the convicted person allows viewers to judge credibility for themselves. Some say hiding these cases would not honor victims either. And sometimes they are right. Silence can protect the wrong people. But exposure without responsibility can also reward the wrong people. That is the tension at the center of modern true crime. It wants to be journalism. It wants to be activism. It wants to be entertainment. And sometimes it is all three at once. The danger is that entertainment usually wins. Not because creators are always cruel. Because entertainment has clearer rules. A story needs a hook, a villain, a twist, a face, a question that makes people stay. Victims rarely get that kind of narrative treatment. Their lives were real, complicated, ordinary, and human. They had habits, flaws, inside jokes, favorite foods, plans, and private fears. But the killer often gets the structure, the origin story, the transformation, the courtroom performance, the interview, the final statement. That is how celebrity is built. Not always through praise, sometimes through endless attention. We think celebrity means admiration. But in the digital age, celebrity can also mean obsession. Hatred can make someone famous. Outrage can make someone famous. Disgust can make someone famous. Every angry click still counts. Every hate watch still teaches the platform that this face keeps people watching. That is why the question is not simple. True crime does not turn every killer into a celebrity. But the system around true crime can. The system rewards recognizable villains. It rewards repeatable names. It rewards shocking faces. It rewards stories that can be argued over, memed, edited, and re-uploaded. And when a killer becomes a symbol, the victims have to fight to remain human. That is the part that should haunt us. Not that people are interested in darkness. Humans have always been interested in darkness. The haunting part is that the darkness now has distribution. It has branding. It has thumbnails. It has autoplay. It has comments. It has fans. So what would responsible true crime look like? Maybe it would start by asking a different question. Not, how do we make the killer interesting? But, how do we make the loss impossible to ignore? It would name the victims carefully. It would avoid turning mugshots into posters. It would not use beauty, mystery, or seduction as bait. It would separate documented fact from speculation. It would not pretend that watching a documentary makes a viewer part of the investigation. It would tell the story without giving the perpetrator the stage forever. And maybe, most importantly, it would remind us that a case is not a genre to the people who lived it. For them, it is not content. It is the worst day of their lives, returning again and again in new formats. A streaming tile, a podcast episode, a TikTok trend, a thumbnail, a debate, a stranger's theory, a comment saying, "I don't know, I kind of feel bad for her." That sentence is where the danger lives. Because empathy is good, but misplaced empathy can become erasure. You can recognize that a perpetrator is human without letting their humanity eclipse the humanity of those they harmed. You can study the psychology of violence without turning violence into personal branding. You can tell a true crime story without making the killer the star. But it takes discipline, and discipline is hard to sell. Spectacle is easier. The crash is not the first case to raise this question. It will not be the last. There will be another documentary, another killer interview, another viral defendant, another family begging people to remember the names of the dead, another platform saying it is simply telling a story, another audience saying it is just curious. And maybe that is the uncomfortable truth. Killers do not become celebrities alone. They need cameras. They need platforms. They need marketing. They need controversy. They need defenders and haters. They need people to say their names over and over. They need us. So before the next true crime story asks you to stare into the killer's eyes, ask yourself one question: whose face is missing from the frame? Because sometimes the most disturbing thing about true crime is not that it shows us evil. It is that, if we are not careful, it teaches us to recognize evil faster than we recognize grief. And once that happens, the killer does not need freedom to become famous. All they need is an audience,